I'm glad you're here. I'm excited to share one of our techniques out of our academic coaching playbook today. I'm actually going to turn my video on here too, and that way you can see me. So I'm excited to share something out of our academic coaching playbook. And I'm also really excited because I got to get a haircut. I cut my own hair yesterday for this, so it's a really nice excuse. So glad to be presenting to you. I'm just going to dive right in. Anybody who's joining us late can join in. So today, what I'd like to do is hopefully give us some, give you all as parents a technique to use to help get to the end of this year without losing your mind. So I'd like to start with a little bit about Signet. Many of you know Signet already. You may be clients or you may be on our newsletter and you have been for a while. Signet is a values-driven organization. We care deeply. We collaborate with our families and our students and our employees and staff. We're on the ball. We inspire confidence and we teach students, not subjects. I always start any discussion about Signet with that because that's really the heart of who we are. Additionally, our services, we help families navigate the academic process from 9th grade through 12th grade. We also do some work for college students as well, but we're primarily focused on high school. And we help families get the most out of their education, whether it's choosing classes, academic support, mentorship. We really make sure that families have everything that they need to get the most out of their educational journeys. Additionally, we provide subject tutoring, test prep, admissions consulting, and academic coaching, which is really what's driving what I'm going to talk to you about today, or the academic coaching playbook is where I get today's presentation. A little bit about me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Signet. Signet was started in 2005, and it was my vision, along with my co-founders, to create a place where we can build meaningful relationships with students and others to help all of us grow over time. So it's not just about a grade, it's not just about a test score, it's not just about going to a particular college, but it's about actually learning and growing through relationships. And everything that I'm going to share with you today, especially, but generally everything that we do, comes out of our own experience. We've worked with thousands of kids over the course of the last 15 plus years. And what I'm going to share with you today is actually stuff that came out of my own experience. I've definitely struggled over the years to stay organized, and sometimes they say the people that struggle most with something make the best teachers of it. And I hope that's true because I've had to think a lot about how to keep myself organized and been able to then transfer that to my students. So the goal for today is to give you a simple, practical technique that you can use now as well as in the future, but it's actually really, really important now. It's a technique that I use with all of my students, and my team uses with all of their students in our academic coaching nearly every single appointment. So it shows you it's kind of the core of what we do with students. And before I dive in, a little bit of a preface. So what I'm going to share with you today is a simple process for keeping things on track. We call it the on-track review when it comes to academics. After I share it with you, you might say, really, that's it? But it's that simple, but the magic is actually in its regular implementation. So don't let the simplicity fool you. It's one of those things that I say it's simple, not necessarily easy. It definitely takes some discipline, but don't let that simplicity fool you. Second, I'm presenting this as something that you can do with your child. The truth be told, some kids can take what I'm about to share with you and do it on their own and basically upgrade their own academic life. Some kids, you're going to be able to sit down with them as their parent and do this. And for some of you, it might be easier to create a coronavirus vaccine than to do what I'm about to share with you with your kids. So if you fall into that last bucket, reach out to us afterwards and we can either coach you through it or we can actually help directly. All right, so before I dive into the specific technique, I want to give us a little bit of background on what it's like to be doing work at home. And I'm going to start with a very simple model that I guess I've created, I use to describe exactly how we get work done. So getting work done starts first with motivation. It starts with having some desire, some kind of goal to move towards. I'll talk a little bit more about what comprises or what creates motivation in us in a moment. That motivation then has to go to organization. So we need to actually take that motivation and organize it. We need to plan, we need to channel that energy effectively before we actually start doing things. If you jump right from motivation to start execution, to start doing things, often you can end up exhausted or not actually working on the right things. If you don't have motivation, you're likely not going to start getting organized and actually doing something. And if you're doing something without organization over time, you generally end up just scattered. So this works in a cycle. You get motivated, you get organized, you plan, you figure out what you're going to do, then you do it. And as that continues, it feeds itself. So the more success a student can have being motivated, being organized, executing, the more motivation they're going to have, and that cycle is going to continue. So what I want to do is actually talk through what this looks like at school versus at home. So in school, motivation comes from a lot of places, but for a lot of students, it comes from peers, seeing their peers do work. I have a very cute example of this. I have a 2-year-old and she goes to daycare. She's not in daycare right now. Somehow in daycare, she naps and she eats all of her lunch. Somehow at home, those two things don't always happen. And I'm convinced it's the seeing all of her peers do those same things. They want to do it together. Doing that at school when you're around people and seeing your peers do work and seeing your peers be successful, that's something that causes more motivation. At home, while we have that virtually, we have that digitally, it's not the same. You don't have that same kind of positive peer pressure and that same kind of collective environment where you see around you everybody doing the same thing. So motivation tends can tend to drop off in an environment like we're in now. Motivation also comes from meaningful and sustained relationships with teachers. When you go to school and you have a teacher that you know cares about you, believes in you, knows you can do better, and they're standing there in the flesh and you can feel that, that's something that causes some motivation. And frankly, you can get that over Zoom, but it's harder. And everybody's scrambling right now. So at home, without that in distance learning environments, that can drop off as well if it's not extremely carefully and thoughtfully done. Motivation also comes from seeing a path forward to college. When we're in school, we see the pennants everywhere. We've got announcements about college. We've got meetings with the guidance counselors. School, in many cases, for a lot of kids, is a path to college, and they get that reinforced in the school environment. But again, at home, it's taken away. And additionally, motivation in many cases can sometimes come just out of a force of habit, right? Of going to school, of going through the ritual of it. And at home, that's not there. So again, before I dive in terms of giving you specific techniques and how to move forward, I want to lay the foundation and say that we are working in a environment that's very different than being at school. And so we may not have some of that same fuel in the tank. Let's do the same thing for organization. So organization, when you're going to school in a physical school environment, you're getting up, you have to get somewhere on time, and right there that gives you structure to your day. You all know as parents, if you are waking up early on a weekday or even on a weekend, and you've got your day planned out ahead of you, you're going to be a lot more productive than if you wake up a lot later and you have not really a clear sense of what's happening. And so that external structure creates the start of organization, right? To organize your homework, just having your day organized makes a big difference. Again, in school we have that, at home we don't. Many teachers actually provide a high level of organization within their classes. Something that we might be getting virtually, but in many cases, a lot of schools or teachers aren't able to provide that for their students. There are a lot of routines that go along with being in school that create organization for students. So, for a lot of students, they come home, they have a particular routine or ritual, whether or not they know it, that leads into homework time. When students aren't in that ritual or routine of going to school and they're at home in one place all day, that can definitely take sort of some of that organizational structure away. And then finally, when it comes to organizing and staying organized, A lot of courses by this point in the year for students tend to be relatively predictable. So teachers, you tend to know how a teacher is going to test, what's coming up this week. But now that we're in a distance learning environment, things change drastically, right? I've seen actually some teachers and professors assigning homework that looks completely different than what they did in class, tests that look completely different. And so all of a sudden, a student's natural way of staying organized for class gets turned on its head. Finally, with execution, what does it look like in school? Well, school, again, often provides a lot of structure for execution. Students have time pressure with their routines. They have study halls. They have resources that they can use for execution. But at home, there's not always that going on. So again, before I dive in, I want to lay the context that the whole cycle of getting work done is off. Sprinkle on top of that a global pandemic, and you also kind of distort this even more. So what I mean by that is very often the skills of organization and execution, not as much motivation, though it is connected, are categorized as executive functions. This is a buzzword that you may hear often. It's essentially our mind's ability to keep itself on track, organized, inhibit impulses. And anxiety has been shown to actually disrupt executive function. So a global pandemic, us all being at home, kids saying, wait, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to my career prospects? What's going to happen to my college prospects? Am I going to see my friends again? We can't underestimate the importance of acknowledging that and allowing that to exist, because that's going to disrupt a kid's ability to actually stay organized. So I put all that out there, first to give us context, and then also to encourage you as parents to make sure that you are keeping all this in mind when you're thinking about helping your kids be productive and get to the finish line, because frankly, for some of them, that might not be what's most important right now. It might be most important to just keep on going and try to create some structure and something that is meaningful to them. But that all said, the other reason I share this is because now more than ever, some of the specific techniques that I'm going to share with you today are more helpful, right? They're really helpful. Now, when everything is in disarray, having tools to stay the course and to stay organized and across the finish line are more important than ever and more helpful than ever. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk through, let me use my laser pointer here. I'm going to talk a little bit through motivation, but the technique I'm going to share with you today is really about organization. So I'm going to give you a little bit on motivation, a little bit on execution, but really going to spend the bulk of the rest of this presentation on organization. So starting with motivation, motivation is both, comes internally. There are a lot of students, and you all may have them or know them, that they just have a drive to do extremely well, to meet their potential, to get an A in every course, to please every teacher. A lot of that motivation can be internal. Internal motivation can also come from a specific source, right? I want to be X when I grow up, or I want to go to X college, or I want to play this sports on this particular team, and for that I need this kind of grade. Motivation can also come externally, and frankly, for a long time I believed, oh, we shouldn't, parents shouldn't use too much external motivation, but I actually think it's, I've come around to thinking that it's a really good technique, especially when you know that a student should be doing something that's really good for them that they are not going to have the internal motivation to do. So external motivation is rewards, but also punishments. But we always recommend that to use those judiciously, especially as a reminder, we're in a pandemic. So the typical rewards and punishments may not be appropriate now. And to give you a little bit of perspective, again, I'm not going to dwell too long on motivation, but a little bit of perspective on how we do it with our students when we're coaching them. I'll walk you through how we generally kind of frame and foster and kind of grow and develop motivation in the event that it can be helpful for you. So what we do is, first, we try to connect with students and understand at a deep level, what are they interested in? What do they want? Why are they doing a certain thing? Why is it important to them, right? We ask those bigger questions, and we do our best to connect whatever the task at hand is to an actual desire that the student has. So, okay, you've got these classes, you're feeling so-so about them, but you really do want to do something that impacts the world in a positive way. And to do that, you probably are going to want to go to college. And in order to go to college, you're going to have to do X, Y, Z. So we bring that big picture goal that student might have and bring it down to earth. That's a highfalutin one, right? You might have another student who just says, look, I just want to have a lot of money when I grow up. Okay, great. Let's work with that, right? But we try to find something students actually want and connect it down to what they need to do today in a real and authentic manner. If you try to create a false connection, it's not going to work. Teenagers are going to see right through that. Then we set a relevant goal, a specific, medium, or short-term goal. So, okay, in order to move towards your long-term goal, you need to get a B in this course, right? Okay. And we don't set the goal. We ask the student to set the goal, actually. What do you need to get in this course, or how do you need to do in these classes? And then as we're going week to week and we're trying to figure out how to make progress and we're getting stuck and things are hard, we always remind the student, we say, well, remember you had this goal, right? Do you still want that? And if they do, usually it's enough to put fuel in the tank for that motivation. Now, sometimes you can't find a relevant goal. And sometimes students say, well, I don't see the point of doing this. And frankly, now more than ever, we have to respect that. We have to actually respect that. We can put an external motivation kind of driver out there and say as parents, well, you have to get certain grades to sort of be in this household. That's fine. But ultimately, if a student doesn't see the relevance of something, we do have to respect that and bring that into conversation and actually try to understand what's going on. If you try to keep pushing against that and a student actually is resistant to that, then you're never really going to make true progress. It's just going to be pure pain for both parties. So that's just a little snapshot of how Signet coaches think about motivation when we're working with our students and how we take motivation and actually bring it down to the ground. So now on to the actual technique that's the heart of today's presentation, the on-track review. So I'm going to talk you through these steps at a relatively high level first, and then I'm going to dive into each one. So this review technique is all about creating a ritual to understand what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and to map it out and to get the work done, and then to reflect on it to say, was that okay? Did I need extra help? Did I actually get done what I wanted to get done? So we start by making an appointment with ourselves, right, as a student or a student and a parent or a student and a coach, a specific time to sit down and look through everything. We do what we call a course scan, which is we look through every single course and standing obligation. Now, typically it's just courses, but some students have, a job or they have a really big obligation, extracurricular, that has stuff that comes up every week for them to do. When we go through each of those and we understand, we look back and say, what happened last week? What's coming up this week? How am I doing? How are my grades? Then we make a to-do list for the next week or segment. It might be a week, it might be a couple of days, depends how often you're doing this on-track review. I'll get more into that in a moment. You map out the work. You say, okay, tomorrow I'm doing this piece. The next day I'm doing this piece. The next day I'm doing this piece. Then the student works the plan and manages obstacles as they come up. This is really one of the most important steps. 1 through 5 is kind of a no-brainer. You could look that up on the internet and find a little, listicle article about these are the 5 ways to get work done. Number 6 is really the important one, and I'll dive into that. And then finally, you rinse and repeat every week. We generally recommend doing this at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. For some students, daily is actually what's most necessary. So again, 7 steps to keeping work on track for the week or for whatever period you've decided. So now I'm going to dive into each one and give you some specific tips on each of these. By the way, at the end of this webinar, for anyone who signed up, we're going to send out an email that actually has these steps listed. Some of you may have received that email from our email list last weekend. If so, you'll get it again. Otherwise, you'll get it fresh. And so we have this all written out for you there. So step 1, make an appointment with yourself. Again, we recommend doing this once a week at the minimum, often twice a week. So a Sunday and a Thursday, or a Monday and a Wednesday, Monday and a Thursday. You want to keep that appointment short. So some tips here on the right-hand side. You want to keep that appointment short, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. This shouldn't be a painful, long, drawn-out dentist appointment process. It should just be a quick thing. Students should be working through a written checklist. So whenever I do this with students, if I'm working online with them, I'm using a Google Doc, and we actually have the checklist at the top or as an agenda for the meeting essentially, or if I'm working with students in person, we write it out. And that checklist is essentially steps 2, 3, and 4. So you need to do the course scan, make the to-do list, map out the work, and anything else you might add to that agenda. It's important to do that because it's so easy for us to get off track, especially if your student is attentionally or organizationally challenged, or if you've got some kind of challenge in terms of getting the work done. That checklist will keep things on track and keep the meeting short. And then finally, perfection isn't the goal. If you set out to do it every Sunday and then you do it on Monday, that's fine. If it's supposed to be quick and it's a little messy and long, that's fine. Just the ritual of doing what I'm about to describe once a week, or even doing something close to it, is going to make a ton of progress for you and for your student. Next, you want to do a course scan. So what I mean by a course scan is you want to go through every single course every week and say, what happened in this course? Is there anything outstanding? What's coming up? What needs to get done? Are there any risks? Do I need to email the professor about grades or anything like that? You want to take a look at every course and essentially say, am I on track? Hence the name On Track Review for this course. And what do I need to do to stay on track? And so some tips here. It's very, very, very easy for students to say, oh yeah, that course, totally fine, I'm good. I always ask for evidence. When I'm working with students as a coach, I always say, okay, great, let's pull up your Canvas or Blackboard or whatever it is, your online syllabus, or let me see that email where you said the teacher said the test was postponed. Let me just take a look at that. Let me just see that really quickly. And at first, students can sometimes be resistant, but then they understand that I'm going to ask for it every single time. And they start to just realize the benefit in it because they start to see, ooh, every once in a while we'll catch something that they missed. Syllabi are great for this, though not all high school courses or not many have syllabi, but if you do have a syllabus, it's great. Emails from the professor, outlines, unit outlines, whatever it might be, you've got to have some kind of evidence available. Now, this can be challenging because sometimes a lot of teachers are not great at posting things. They're not great at updating things, in which case sometimes that means every week you're saying, well, you're gonna have to check in with the teacher on that. And by the way, a quick aside, whenever we're doing this with our students, I sort of say that you'll have to tell the student to do X, Y, or Z. That's actually not how we work. We generally ask the student, well, what do you think we should do about that? And have the student come up with their own plan, because ultimately that's generally far better than the plan that we'll come up with, or at least far more likely to be stuck to if they come up with it. Second tip is check grades every week. Are there any grades posted? Was anything handed back? That's the feedback loop for your student on that course scan to make sure that they're on track, that they're doing what they need to be doing. Maybe they thought they were studying really effectively, but their quiz didn't go so well. Great, that's good to know, because we need to understand what happened in order to make sure we're staying on track for the next segment. Do it no matter what. So that's the course scan. So even if you're like, if a student says everything's on track, I think it's fine, just go through the ritual. It will take 5 minutes and it will refresh what's going on at the very least. But 9 times out of 10, when I do this, students find something that they weren't thinking about or wasn't on their radar. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, you have to write down what needs to be done. For every course, you jot down whether it's a to-do, whether it's read a particular chapter or do a problem set or email a professor or anything. You've got to make sure that that's actually recorded and written down. Next, you create a to-do list. I changed it from weekly to-do list to just to-do list here because for some people, they may be doing this twice a week, so it's not necessarily weekly. You want to create a to-do list from this check-in to whenever you think the next check-in is going to be. So if it's Sunday and you're doing this and you think you're going to check in again on Thursday, create a to-do list for that period. Now, of course, you've got to balance, you got to look ahead and make sure you're not missing anything on Friday. That's a big project or whatnot. But generally, I like to think in these chunks. And that to-do list is essentially a compiled list of to-dos from the course scan. So you take all those to-dos, put them in one place. And a couple of tips here, you have to use, the more you use precise language, the better the outcome will be. So what I mean by that is instead of do history reading, a student should write down exactly what they need to read, whether it's the pages or the assignment or what. If you can put down how long they think they're going that it's going to take, then they'll do an even better job. So you want to facilitate your student using really precise language when it comes to creating this to-do list, because the next day or the day after, it might not be as clear as it is now. We've all had that experience where in the moment we write down a to-do. I do this all the time, and I write something down, and then the next day I look at it and I can read it, and I have absolutely no idea what it means. You want to avoid that. You want to reduce the barriers to actually doing the work by writing things down in a precise way. The more precise it is, the easier it's going to be to actually get started the next day or the day after, when a student is feeling lethargic or not like work, or they don't necessarily feel like working. When they can look and see something clear, they can actually get started on it. To that end, you also want to facilitate students breaking things down. So if they've got a really big project, this is the time to actually break that down into multiple steps, right? And you can ask them, hey, are you going to be able to get all that done in a day? No. Okay. How would you break this down, right? Ask them, let them break it down. Part of this is having them learn how to learn these specific skills for themselves in the future. And then finally, on that list, you generally want to prioritize. If there's certain things that are super low priority, mark them. Certain things that are higher priority, mark them. I always like to say, do the higher priority things first, let the lower priority things come a little bit later. So now we're maybe 20, 30 minutes into our 15 to 20 minutes into our self-appointment. We've done a course scan. We've created a to-do list. We've kind of compiled it and made sure it's written clearly. We've broken some things down and we've prioritized. Next is to map out the work. And so what this means is to say, all right, let's not just leave this as a to-do list. Let's connect this to what it looks like for the rest of the week. Now, the really over-eager version of this, which I used to do, and I have some students that like to do it when they first start, is to really map it out to like 15-minute increment on their calendar. I'm going to do this from this time, from 3:15 to 4, I'm going to do this, and from 4 to 4:10, I'm going to do this, and from 4:30 to 5, I'm going to do this. I found that that typically fails for students because it just doesn't respect kind of the flexibility of some of these assignments, how some might be shorter or longer. Generally makes things a little bit too rigid. So what I generally recommend is in whatever granularity works for the student, have the student say, I'm going to do this approximately on this day, approximately at this time, or in this order, or in the morning, or in the afternoon. You kind of have to experiment to figure out what's going to work as a student, and you want to respect your students' wishes. On that note, what we always do as coaches is we always respect what students say, and we let them try it in a particular way. And if it doesn't work that way, then we compassionately ask if we can offer a suggestion to do it a different way. That's generally always works better than, oh, you're doing it wrong, you got to do it this way. And so a couple tips. Record it usually on a calendar. Calendar, again, you can be loose about what I just described and still use a calendar. You just don't have to record exact timings, but you can say in the morning, make a big work block and just list out what you're going to do in that work block. In the afternoon, do the same. You want to be deliberate. So what I mean by that is you want to think about what's going on in a student's life. If they're not going to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning, just putting something on a calendar as doing something at 8 o'clock in the morning is not actually going to make it happen. So be deliberate, be thoughtful about what's going on for a student in their life. How much time do they actually have? How much energy do they actually have? And help them to be deliberate about how they plan for themselves. You want to make sure that students aren't rigid and that they're not overshooting. If they're rigid about timings, that's a recipe for disaster. If they're overshooting, that's also a recipe for disaster too. So those are just a couple of tips on mapping out the work. Next, work the plan. And so this is really that execution step that in the cycle that I told you about, the 3 cycles. So the motivation, organization, execution. Work the plan is really the execution part of this. So that's really about just sitting down and getting the work done. And that's different for every single student. But a couple of tips here is you want to have a good physical space for work. If everybody's on top of each other in the living room trying to get work done, it's tough. So if there's not a lot of physical space, then maybe there's shifts, maybe there's space and time. But if you don't take anything away from this presentation, except for working with your student to try to find a place in the house that's theirs, that they can really focus and actually be diligent and feel like is their own to do work. That would be a great single takeaway from this whole presentation. So having a place to work, a chair, a desk, or a table is really important. Routines are like the secret weapon, especially when it comes to people like me and many of my students who are attentionally challenged or organizationally challenged. Routine is the secret weapon. It's in fact what's allowed me to get so much done and do so much in my life. It's through routines. So yes, the kind of the flavor of the day is having no routine and having everything thrown up in the air because of coronavirus. But to the extent that you can help kids identify what they want their routine to be and stick to it, the better. So that's thinking about the whole day and then figuring out where work fits into that routine. Distractions. There are distractions everywhere. There's existential distractions, and then there's menial distractions, there's funny distractions, and there's heartbreaking distractions. To the best of your ability, you want to encourage your kids to try to understand the power of reducing those distractions while doing work. And one of the best things that we suggest for this is called the Pomodoro technique. You can Google it. It's very simple, using a timer to focus for particular blocks of time while you're doing work and give yourself particular blocks of time of rest. And while you're focusing, the phone is down, the phone is off, notifications are off on the phone or on the computer. And it's a short enough amount of time to actually just get something done and not feel like, oh, I'm giving my whole life to this dumb English paper. It's like 25 minutes, right? So those are some tips on working the plan and execution. Again, that's a little bit that we could do a whole different presentation on that. But really you want to, again, work with your kids to ask them, what do you need to get your work done? What kind of routine do you want to set up for yourself? The more you can put them in the driver's seat to actually make these decisions, the much more likely it is that this will actually work for them. Now, again, I mentioned 1 through 5, you probably could find in a quick internet search. Number 6 is really the key to making this more than just kind of a glib blog post. So number 6 is managing obstacles. So, okay, your student has done a course scan, they've got their to-do list, they mapped out the work, they've started to work the plan, and then inevitably they hit a wall. It always happens, right? For all of us, right? For any time we do this. And the students who can actually step back and say, well, what happened? Why did that happen? What am I going to do differently? Who can I ask for help? That is where students really can learn how to sort of step up their game academically. And so in this case, this is something that our coaches do all the time. This might be something that you can do with your student, which is you want to create some kind of compassion and accountability, right? So when a student says they're going to do something, there should be some closing of the loop where they're asked, hey, how did that go? And so when I say compassion and accountability, it's not, did you get that done? It was, how did that go? What went well with that? What was challenging about that? And you want to just create that space for a student to reflect on what happened. Oh, well, I definitely bit off way too much, or that was so boring, I couldn't keep my eyes open. Any kind of that information, you need to get that out so that a student can actually reflect on that to say, well, all right, well, since that was so boring, next time, this is something I used to do in high school for really boring texts. I would actually stand up and read them on a music stand because otherwise I'd fall asleep. And so, quirky little thing, but that was something I came up with that worked well for me. You need to help your students figure out, well, that was the obstacle. What do you want to do about it? How are you going to surmount that obstacle? And again, all this comes back to having some kind of motivational structure in place and having a positive coaching relationship. The second tip here is the safer the space, the more they'll share. Sometimes I'm sitting with a student, and when I see them, like they say they did something or they didn't do something, I'm thinking to myself, like, how we spent the entire last session talking about this. How did you not get that done? That's what's going on inside. Outside, I'm saying, wow, what happened? Tell me about that. Because it's not about me. It's about creating a safe space for the student to be able to get them to reflect and actually share. For some students, they've got a lot of I almost call it like catch-up work to do to even get themselves to a place where they can start to be super productive or even productive in general. And you've got to create the space for them to do that. And finally, the third tip here is who can help. So when a student hits an obstacle, you certainly want them to learn how to solve those things themselves, but very often it's knowing who to call for help in a particular thing, whether it's a friend or a family member or the teacher or a tutor or coach. Having students understand that when they hit a wall, that they're not alone in that, and that there's somebody that can help them move around that is really powerful. So this number 6 actually happens. It can happen in real time during the week, or it can happen in the subsequent appointment when we're reviewing what happened for the previous segment of time. Finally, number 7, rinse and repeat. It's really important to keep this regular. Regularity is everything. It's really important to do this on a regular basis. Again, you don't have to be perfect about it, but you've got to be pretty regular. If you do it right, it's a self-correcting process. So if a student is really going through every course every time, if they miss something, it's going to come back up on the radar again. So it's a beautiful process in that way that you don't actually have to stress that much about it. It's more about just doing it. And then finally, there's redundancy built in so that if you've got 2 in a week and you do it once, you're going to stay on track. Generally speaking, if you're doing this at least once a week, and you're doing exactly what's said here, there's enough redundancy in the whole system to make sure that things generally stay on track. And so again, that's the 7 steps of this on-track review process. And like I said at the very beginning, it's an extremely simple process, but it's not necessarily easy. And the hardest thing, I think, for parents to think about is really how to create that space and have that open relationship with their student to actually have this conversation. Again, some students, you can show them this and they'll be like, oh man, that's a great idea. I'm going to try it. It worked, Mom. Other students are going to say, can you help me with it? Can you hold me accountable? And they mean compassionately. Can you be my advocate here, not my taskmaster? And then again, some students, you're going to show them this and they're going to shut down because there's just a lot more going on. So I always like to address the question that a lot of people will have when discussing this kind of thing is whether to do this alone or to do it with a coach. And so as a parent, if you're thinking about this, you're saying, hey, that seems like a good technique. Like, I think my student should do this, or I think they should try it. It might help us get unstuck. Again, it's not the be all end all by any means, but it could be something to help move things along. Here's when you should consider doing it yourself or introducing it yourself to your students. So the motivation and execution in our little model are okay. Your students motivated, they want to do the work, and they're actually working, they're working hard, and they're spending time, but they're just kind of all over the place. They're scattered. That's a good candidate for doing it on their own. Work is happening and it's scattered, it's not focused, but there's generally movement there. That's generally a sign that this technique introduced into that system might make a difference. And then finally, let's say your kid is not able to necessarily do it on their own, but you have that open relationship with them. In my experience, I've talked to lots of parents, lots of families. I'd say probably about 30 to 35% of parents could sit down with their kids and have this kind of conversation in a way that's productive. It might be a little tricky, right? Parent might have to stay in the right mindset. And the rest, it would be hard. But if you have that kid for whom you can have that conversation and you can really approach it from a place of compassion and generosity and really desirous, being desirous of helping, then definitely give it a shot. When should you call in an academic coach? Well, if you don't have the relationship and you know your student wants more help. If you don't have the relationship and your student doesn't want more help, that's a tough spot. You should call us and we can kind of talk through it. But if you don't necessarily have that relation, maybe you have a great relationship with your kids, you're just not going to help them with their homework, it's not going to work, then that's when a coach might be great. When you know that something is high stakes for your student, when you know that they want to achieve a particular standard or a particular goal or outcome for themselves, and you know that they may not have everything that it takes right now, all the skills to actually do that, that's a great time to consider bringing in a coach, again, to help meet a high stakes goal. If you're not sure about their motivation or their motivation is kind of iffy, a coach can very often help with that. We can't work magic, and we're certainly not psychologists, but we can create a space that generally is a little different than the space that parents can create with kids to talk about what they actually truly want. It's not that we can always solve the problem. Very often we can't, but we can definitely help students get closer to the root of that. And in many cases, that generally can increase motivation. And then finally, if you just feel like, hey, I just don't want to be the accountability person in our relationship. I don't want to be the person driving my student to the finish line. I want to have a beautiful relationship with them, especially in this challenging time. I want somebody else to help them get across the finish line. That's a great time to also call in a coach. So what to do next? We're going to send out a follow-up email. It's going to have the text that I mentioned, and it's also going to have a guide to studying that will also include an extra thing, not related to this, but if you're here, it's probably something relevant to your kids in terms of studying for exams that are coming up. I'd encourage you to experiment. Experiment might be introducing this, but an experiment might be just taking the spirit of the conversation that we're having here in terms of that openness, that questioning, that curiosity. And maybe experimenting is just asking the question of how's school going in a different way. How can I help? What do you think would make your experience better? What do you like about this? What do you not like about this? Getting out of the kind of having a stake in the game or horse in the race, and getting into the, let me be curious about what's going on with you so that maybe I could help facilitate some progress there. And finally, we know it's a difficult time academically. We see the memes, we see the videos, and they're funny and they make light of it. But we also know that everybody's on top of each other at home. And so if there's anything, we're experts in helping students navigate academic trajectories in challenging times and in good times. And so if there's anything we can do, we have tons of resources. We're always happy to have a quick conversation on the phone. We're not the kind of company that charges you for it turns the meter on the moment you call us. Happy to help in any way possible. And of course, we also have coaches and a finish line package to help deliver exactly what I shared with you here to students from now until the end of the semester. And so our contact information is here. And at this point, my song and dance is over, but I would love to answer any questions if there are any. If there are any, you can put them in the chat and I will receive them as they come through. But for anyone who has questions, please stay on and chat with us here and I'll answer them. If not, really appreciate your joining, and you'll get a follow-up email shortly. And we wish you the best of luck navigating the rest of this academic year. Please call us if we can help in any way possible. Any suggestions for how to help students stay motivated during the unknown? They don't know if they're going back to school. They're likely having pass-fail grades. Yes. It's not an easy answer, as you know. If it were, you wouldn't be asking the question. But generally speaking, I'm trying to avoid getting on my sort of philosophical long rant and keep it short for you. But generally speaking, when we're thrown into uncertainty like this, it's throwing the external into uncertainty, right? So the external meaning, school, grades, college, these things that are coming in from the outside. Those are the things that are kind of up in the air. But there's still a lot that students can tune into internally that can still be steady during this time. And that may or may not have to do anything with school. So it's our firm belief that if a student isn't motivated by school, trying to find some magic trick to get them to be motivated by school, that might be ideal, but what's actually more ideal is if they can be motivated by something, anything that's important to them. That's actually can be really powerful. So what I generally recommend is to have students think through what is it that's important to them. And we actually have a newsletter coming out, I think next week about this. And that newsletter is going to share next week or week after. It's going to share what we call the top 10 tool. And any of you who are interested, you can email us directly at info. We can share that with you. But it's just a little basic framework to try to help students think through what is actually meaningful and motivating to them in this time. So if it's not school, okay, what is it? Is it relationships? Is it friendships? Are they just scared, right? And you've kind of got to get into some of that to understand what is actually motivating. And in some cases, we can actually tie that back to academics. But in other cases, we can't. And we just say, look, do your best on your academics, keep them afloat. Don't do something that you're going to regret next year if possible. But let's actually take that energy that you might have spent there and put it into something else, whether it's learning, whether it's reaching out and helping the community in whatever ways possible virtually, whether it's connecting with family and friends, whatever it is, if it can be done with some kind of intent and discipline and some kind of desire to grow and improve, then it can be a learning experience, even if it's not exactly related to school. So again, any suggestions, the question was any suggestions for how to help students stay motivated during the unknown? If I were to boil it down, I would say to help them think more broadly about what's motivating to them during this time and be okay with pursuing that, even if that's not something that's directly related to school. And again, please email us directly if you'd like to get that tool or learn anything more about that, whether it's on our Facebook page or email or old-fashioned phone calls. We're still answering the phone. Really, really grateful to have you as part of our community and here to help in whatever way we can. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll end the webinar now.